Hello and welcome back to Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica. Hey guys, today I have a really fun topic in mind for you. It's Scott Grace has joined us. Now, Scott Grace he is a comedian. He's also a form of life coach. He is a songwriter. He is the author of Mindful Masculinity, a book for men and the women who love them to try and help us understand the male perspective, but also to help men heal the wounds that result to their emotional structure from a very gendered world. Now, by Scott's own admission, he says that he has made every mistake possible in relationships, and he addresses all of these things with humor, with grace, with an eye towards mindfulness, where we're trying to help men rejoin their ability to have full access to their emotional construction, which leads everybody to greater happiness and to greater relationships. And one of the reasons that it can be very important for women in particular who are interested in men to understand the burdens that men and I already kind of bear in this society and how we can go about fixing them. And before we even get started, I want everybody to understand that trauma is not a contest. We are not comparing the wounds of do women have it worse? Do men have it worse? Do people of color have it worse? We're not doing that here because the answer to every single problem that we have is start with healing. If we start with healing, we can address our problems without our damage being an impediment to that healing. And when we're healed, particularly as a society, we're not just going to have better relationships with one another, we're going to have a better society overall. Because most of the difficulties that we encounter in this society are actually caused by some damage to our emotional world and our relationship to self that comes upon us because of the power structures that try and teach us who we are, who we're meant to be, always to be self-questioning so that we don't discover our own particular gifts and we don't have relationships and professions that then satisfy us, but rather serve the needs of a power structure. So wow, that's really super weighty. But like I said, Scott actually has a background in comedy and he is open for the likes of Robin Williams, of Dana Carvey, but he also is someone who's associated with multiple life enrichment figures, including, let's see, Deepak Chopra, everybody knows him, Les Brown, Reverend Jesse Jackson. The list actually goes on and on there. When reading over his bio, I actually just selected the names most likely to ping with people, but it's a really substantial list. So we're talking about somebody who has a lot of diverse experience both in making mistakes and in figuring out how to correct them. I'm Alane. You can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for a life coaching session or a tarot card reading session. You can find me at my Patreon. You can find me at Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica, and you can also find me at Cronecast at The Rising Moon on YouTube. And speaking of YouTube, one of the things that Scott has done was he is let me make sure I get this right, the spiritual Dr. Suess on YouTube as well. Hey, Scott, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you?
Oh, they can find me in the universe. Third
Awesome.
dimension, probably the simplest one. There's something called the internet. There is a YouTube channel. Just look up Scott K. Grace. There's my Facebook, again, Scott K. Grace. And there's scottsongs.com.
Okay.
SCOTTSONGS.com. And the reason that I've been associated with all the people that you mentioned and a lot more is because I have the ability to create songs in the moment. So they would talk about something and then they would turn to me and know that I would have the perfect words in song to drive their message deeper into both the left and the right brain. I
Actually,
hope I get a chance to do a little of that today.
you'd be welcome to. One of the things that we need to understand is that breaking down the barriers, we all have a resistance to new information. So one of the things that Scott is referring to is called an access point. Now, entertainment can be an access point, poetry, artistry, all of these things are access points to our inner world where we don't put up the same resistance to change, to self-examination. So it is actually a kind of a really strong and multi-purpose tool to have access points that kind of bypass our regular boundaries and defense mechanisms that keep us locked into behaviors and into beliefs that don't serve us and don't make us happier. So it does make perfect sense to me. Hey, Scott, will you talk to me a little bit about what led you to write this particular book?
Yes. What led me to write this particular book is I had spent most of my life thinking I'm not good enough as a man and collecting evidence on that behalf, starting with biceps and all kinds of reasons, couldn't protect and whatever. So I realized at some point that my greatest weakness, or what I thought of as my greatest weakness, had within it strengths. And I was helping both men and women get in touch with their feminine side, with their vulnerability in ways that were really making a difference. And I was wondering, wow, what happened? How did that happen? How did I develop that? And do I have anything to say about that? And it turned out I had about 300 pages of stories uh, and poetry and comedy along the lines of how to develop more of your left and right hemispheres of the brain and come into a whole brained approach to living. Because we've had goddess societies and patriarchal societies, but not too many people on the planet really have both, and that's where my work is.
And it's actually one of the things that we really need to stress is that when we talk about gender programming, and by the way, like let's really stress here, we're not talking about gender dysphoria here. That is an entirely separate subject. But we are talking about the role of gender programming in how we seek fulfillment, how we see ourselves, what roles we think we're suited to, and how we handle our emotional world. Now, women are taught that we want somebody to hear us, which unfortunately puts women in the position of constantly seeking validation instead of listening to their own inner voice and knowing what they feel. And so finding a better balance with that will put women back in touch with their own ability to be leaders, as a for instance. If you're not always looking for do it by committee, somebody else validate me, you're more likely to be a leader in your own right. This also relieves men of a lot of pressure to carry a different form of emotional weight, both in our society and in relationships. And men, quite frequently, are taught that their vulnerability is weakness instead of access to their ability to love. And so, men, quite frequently, the only emotion that they can readily access is anger, because anger is a protective construct within our psyche. And when we're actually fearful, when we're grieving, when we're thwarted by our own happiness, many men have been programmed through their gender experience to reach first for anger. And it really poisons their particular personal wells. So it behooves all men to be able to access their inner world, or what's also called their feminine side. And we all contain masculine and feminine energies. I'm kind of living proof of that. I did not have a feminine guiding role within my childhood experience. I was exceptionally isolated. And so I present in this very like dominant sort of energy for a lot of people, but I'm also a girly girl who has all kinds of like flower things all over my home. I've been changing all my appliances to pink things because I like girly stuff as well. Kind of proving that who we are is who we are programmed to be, and that your personality, when left to its own devices, will discover your own strengths. Scott, can you talk to me a little bit about the mistakes you've made that you think you know better than now, when through the work that you've done, through your mindfulness and spirituality journey?
I don't think I'm capable of ever giving my power away to an authority figure again, whether it be a woman that I want to please or a spiritual teacher that I think knows more than me. That has been done enough, and I do feel like have resourced my own self validation and self acceptance enough. So the whole game of looking outside myself for something is has been played and played to fruition. And let's see, what else? What other mistakes have I made? Um,
The reason I'm
oh,
asking is that there had to be a catalyst for change in your life.
yeah. There's been many, many. Dark nights of the soul have been the most productive places for transformation. And a lot of grief over relationship breakups, uh, single parenting, grief has been the greatest teacher because it's been so overpowering that my structures for managing my feelings, controlling my feelings, they couldn't stand the fire or the torrential rainpour of grief, and that humbled me and made me a good student of life.
Is it okay to ask what the origin of the grief was, or was it many things?
Well, it depends on how far you want to go back, because I'm, a big believer in past lives, but certainly like I remembered being like in a crib, crying my eyes out, and not getting the attention. I was a bit, so abandonment was the big one, rejection, and how that played out in my intimate relationships. I would choose women who were wanting something a little different than me. And then I would become their great reform project. And when I didn't reform ideally, they would break up with me, and then I would cry my eyes out.
What I'm always telling clients is partners aren't projects, is that we meet people as they are and expect them to stay as they are, although you can take journeys of personal growth and it can happen within relationships. That never approach someone as somebody that you're trying to change with your love. Because the only love that truly changes us is the love within, which is kind of what I think Scott is talking about, is that in order to quit looking to the love without, which is the personal relationships, maybe the relationship to career, he had to start examining his inner world to understand the choices that he was making in his relationships. And one of the things that you just said, Scott, is something that I really want people to understand. You talked about crying your eyes out and how frequently men really are shamed around the idea of accessing their more vulnerable emotions, but your answers are in those vulnerable emotions. And so it benefits men so very much to stop being ashamed of them. If we want everybody to heal, we really need to shelve the idea of guilt and shame around having a full emotional spectrum in somebody, regardless of their gender presentation or their gender identification. And when we're talking about gendered roles for men and for women, men are very particularly taught that, and I'm almost telling my clients this, is that women try to get married to have a lifelong love story, and men have a tendency to get married to try and be responsible because that is what they are programmed to do in our society. That responsible men get married and they have two kids and they contribute to the economy in this way, that, and the other, and they don't show their feelings around each other. And men, as they socialize together, quite frequently shame one another about those feelings of vulnerability, of sadness, of abandonment, of not finding the love that they want. So we have an epidemic of loneliness in single men. Is that something that you've kind of observed as well, Scott? Because the work that, when I read about your work, I was really excited because somebody really needs to help men who are struggling with that programming and feeling good about deconstructing it and putting together a better emotional foundation. So the work that you're doing, the access points that you found to that, how did they work for you and how do you think they can work for other people?
Well, the first thing is to confront the taboo that men have of asking for help from each other, from therapists, from coaches. There's that old joke about men not wanting to ask for directions if they're lost. Well, it is usually pain, addiction, failure, bankruptcy, divorce that gets men in a position where they're willing to ask for help. Doesn't have to be, doesn't have to be suffering is your only instigator, but it very often is. And I, since 1996, have been in a men's movement, the New Warrior, and it's all over the world, and it's a safe place for men to cry, to explore their shadow, to be brutally honest with themselves and with each other. And so I consider myself like sort of in the solution, spreading the alternatives, but I am aware that loneliness is an epidemic in men because if we're afraid to open our hearts in love, in caring, in vulnerability, in tears, if we're afraid to even admit that we're ashamed, like, oh, I have shame, that's a very hard thing for a man to do, to look within and name shame. My goodness, no, shame likes to hide in the covers. But because of this taboo against vulnerability, our loneliness as men very often turns into bullets, bombs. If we can't have love, what's the next best thing? Power, possessions. It's a substitute for what we really need and want. But once we've written that off, then, hey, let me see how much money I can make. Let me see how many women I can put on my scorecard or whatever.
When you heal your internal world, you will find, regardless of whether you're a man or woman, whatever your gender identification may be, you will find that you need fewer external things, fewer possessions, fewer like throwaway relationships to fill a temporary need. Less of a need to identify your worth by your profession, what kind of job you have, what kind of car you drive. All of these things, when we connect a man's ability to assess his own emotional needs in a way that society has stripped away, it can only help the world entirely. Because we have focused so much on making money, on stuff, and it's not getting us anywhere. Lord, we have some problems down here that we really, really, really need to focus on solutions. But nothing gets solved until the people who are working on those solutions are healthier. And when you've amputated half of your population's ability to be in like true connection with what would make them happier, who they really are, what their gifts really are, and why we are unhappy, then you start out in a handicapped position because patriarchal societies, of course, serve men first. But we need to really stress something, which is that the vast majority of men are victimized within that structure as well. That there's
Yeah.
only a very small percentage of men who are ever going to hold that power. And so everybody else is below that upper echelon with feelings of self-doubt because they're not in this rarefied energy where people really truly have such a ego-driven experience that it does not serve the world around them. And what Scott's talking about is making the world around you serve your inner world in a way that is less demanding on self and less defining of self. So it's a really exciting field to be going into. And
Mhm.
Scott, you've been in this for a while. How has your life transformed from this particular approach to your emotional world?
It's made it a lot harder. I don't recommend it.
Okay, well then don't let me get it
In
wrong,
other
please.
words, I'm being a little facetious, but
Obviously.
I do have a romantic, nostalgic relationship with ignorance and denial. Sometimes I think I was a lot happier when I didn't know anything about my shadow, when I couldn't process my feelings, when I relied on substances. And that's mostly a joke, but I do want to emphasize that there is a great deal of responsibility in becoming aware of who you are, aware of your shadow, your light, your gifts, your strength. Uh, Not responsibility in the sense of guilt, you're not bad or good or any of that moral stuff, but just having a big flashlight and turning it inside past the inner critic. The inner critic, the self guilt, all that stuff, that wants to be your moral compass, but it's not. It's just a block. Yeah, so shining the flashlight of self awareness past the inner criticism into pure observation of what makes you tick. Is it compulsive? Are you really using your free will? Or is it your wounding that is driving the bus? And I'm just realizing that gradually, especially with the emotional work that I've done, that I have become happier. And I certainly feel much more like a minimalist, as you were describing. I don't need stuff. I don't need anything. Food, water, bathroom. And that's great. That's very liberating. But I also feel more responsible for the inner work and how that can help the world.
One of the things that you're pointing out, like the idea of shining a flashlight within, you cannot heal something you will not look at. So it is a crucial part of defining, well, what's going on within me? What caused it? How do I deal with it? How do I cope with it? One of the things that you said, and you did say you're speaking fairly facetiously, and I understand that, is it is actually a form of easy to not do this work because you're just like you're moving through the rut of life where you're just in a groove that was predetermined for you, and you can self-medicate away most things with alcohol, with drugs, with sex, with possessions, with the
Social
idea,
media.
yeah, exactly, with the admiration of others, the validation from the exterior source. And so I get that part because there is a phase within a whole spiritual awakening, a spiritual enlightenment, which is also an emotional healing, guys, in which you have to unpack all the stuff that you've been ignoring and has been accumulating and has been holding you back and that you've been medicating away and that you've been distracting yourself from. And that stage, it sucks like a Hoover. There's just no other way to put it. But then it doesn't. And then you feel better and more connected and happier in a way that is less challenged by the world around you. And so the difficult work then opens, it's like the Wizard of Oz when they go from black and white to Technicolor. You've been living in the Kansas world of the black and white, defining everything in the way that you're meant to by a society that does not actually have your best interests at heart. It has its best interests at heart, usually with power accumulation. The first period of trying to cross over into the Technicolor world, I see all my feelings. I understand all about me, even the stuff that I wouldn't want to talk to other people about. I understand it. That stage is uncomfortable, but that discomfort leads to the ability to comfort yourself because you will then understand yourself. And that is really what we're talking about when people reach for the external things like drugs, like alcohol, is they're looking for some form of comfort. And what Scott is talking about is if you do your internal work, then you will find that you have the ability to comfort yourself because you fully understand yourself. And you won't look to external relationships as much. One of the things that I read in your bio was talking about overcoming the need to be the fixer in your personal relationships and your romantic relationships, because a lot of pressure is put on. Women want to be heard and men are solution oriented, but then they feel bad if they don't have a solution, and not everything has a solution to it, other than sometimes it's just a feeling it will pass. We've got work to do. It's a difficult world. We go through difficult periods that teach us a lot about our strengths and our weaknesses. And so it's an unfair burden to put on men to be like, you got to fix this. Only we can truly fix what ails us with understanding when it comes to our emotional world. That's the role of therapy. I'm a big proponent of people going to qualified therapists who have been trained, who can accurately diagnose you with whatever disorders or dysfunction that you might possess. And in fact, the need to be a fixer is one of the hallmarks of having come from a dysfunctional family unit. What was your growing up experience like, Scott? What did it teach you, and what did you have to unlearn?
Okay, so
That
what
was a
was
big
my
one.
growing up experience like? Let's see. We have what about 6.5 more hours?
We'll just
Well, my
condense.
father, my father was a doctor, and so uh, he expressed his love and service by fixing people's bodies. Um, I don't even want to mention my mother right now. Let's just condense this to what I learned from my father is that love is about finding the problem and then fixing it. And interestingly enough, when I became an entrepreneur, the guiding light of starting a business is identify a problem and then offer a solution. So this kind of thinking has been with me all my life. And the idea that either a woman's feelings or my feelings, as they come up, don't need fixing. They need listening, validation, sometimes even celebration, certainly affection, but no solutions unless that's asked for. Unless it's like, okay, let's roll up our sleeves and look at solutions. That was far into me. And I've had to learn, by comforting myself when I'm feeling sad, lonely, scared, angry, hurt, by really being able to be with that without trying to fix it, letting it flow, like come and go. That's what grief has taught me, to let things come and go, that there's nothing
Genuinely.
that's forever. And then there's some art and science and methodology teaching a man to listen to a woman when she's in her feelings. And that's in the book.
And
Things to
I
do.
like that there are tools to try and help people cross into what is a foreign land for them. It's a little bit of a passport into being able to do that. The reason that
Yes.
we want to get away from being too solution oriented is that the idea of fixing something is there. We aren't out to fix our feelings, we're out to understand them. And to understand that literally everything will pass. One of the things that I teach people who are trying to cope with CPTSD, which does result in emotional repression and sometimes emotional regulation issues, is that what you want to do is understand that it's a band aid. If you go towards the action that you take within the 3D, then it is not a healing, it is a short-term solution. And that if you don't address the underlying issues that might be making you feel sad, abandoned, unloved, unimportant, all of the things that both men and women struggle with. But women are schooled and programmed and socialized to really be in touch with that side of themselves. Whereas men are taught that they need to close the door on it or they won't achieve and they won't succeed. And what Scott's talking about is a tool that is designed for the masculine viewpoint to be able to start opening that door. And even if it does mean shining a light into the closet and going, oh my God, that's a lot, sooner or later it won't be. Sooner or later, if you start the work, when people, particularly at like a more advanced stage of life, because this really affects older people that came from a very, very gendered world as well. Why would you start doing this work if it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years? Because you're going to be 3, 4, 5 years older, regardless of whether or not you heal. Meaning that you can be 3, 4, 5 years older and still in the same state of having very little emotional fulfillment and a little emotional self-understanding, or you can start undertaking the difficult work and you can heal and be a transformed person by the end of that 3, 4, 5 years. So it is hard
Mm.
work and it is tough. I mean, it is tough. You have to be prepared to just, men, women, does not matter what you're identifying as. You have to be prepared for some emotional backlog purging when you start this work. So you work with humor a great deal. And I think that that's a really, really wise tool, particularly to help men, because being able to laugh at something takes the fear away from it. So
Mm.
is when you are, do you still do stand-up performances, or is this something that you've like turned in a new direction on?
I live in Mexico now, and I have been hired to do pure stand-up entertainment, but I don't seek that kind of employment, and I don't put myself out that way anymore. I usually like to weave humor into my speaking, and even one-on-one with clients. I'll sense this is a moment to help them lighten up about this, and it's beautiful because that moment creates disarmament, and then through that it comes a deeper truth, a deeper receptivity. What did you call it? A reference point? The
An
things that
access
we can.
point. Access
What
point.
did you call it? An access point. I love
Access
that.
point. It opens the
Yeah.
door because you're not, it's what we've found throughout sociological studies have kind of proven this, is that we make greater advancements through fiction than we do through scientific study when it comes to this particular, because it opens that door.
Did you say
The
fiction or friction?
fiction, it is
Yay!
because we actually drop our guard around fiction. And
Yes.
the easiest example I have of this is always going to be the movie Philadelphia, in which people thought AIDS was like gay cancer and there was so much homophobia around it. And it was very distancing and people died terrible and isolated lives with a great deal of judgment until Tom Hanks, one of the most beloved figures in the entertainment industry, did a career-risking move, by the way, which people don't associate it with it now, but that man hung his butt out over the line to do this by playing an AIDS-afflicted gay lawyer, and he humanized the idea, just like Brokeback Mountain did.
Yes.
The
Yes.
humanization of a sociological problem that involved hatred and fear and judgment was started to be dismantled on a fictional stage. And so
Oh.
fiction is another access point to meaningful change, as is humor. It's an access point. When you find something where people's defenses are no longer coming in and blocking out
Mm-hmm.
information
Mm-hmm.
or causing them to shut down, because our ego gets involved in anything in the 3D. We drop our guards, we have an access point around humor, around fiction, around music, which is another one that you work with. So one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is that you have a way of bypassing the defensiveness that we can all run into when we're being told, hey, listen, you have something to fix. It is not an accusation. It is not an accusation to say you have something in your internal world that needs healing. It is an observation of, you want to feel better? You need to heal this. And it starts with the ability to stop being defensive, to control your own access points, to say, I'm going to learn about this. If it does make me uncomfortable, if it does dig up stuff from the past, if it does make me question everything that I knew about this world, good, because that's where the solutions and the healing comes in.
I agree. And I would love to give you a taste of where poetry and a little humor
Love to hear it.
opens the defenses and allows deeper wisdom to come in. So this is from the middle of the first poem that the spiritual Dr. Seuss, my altered ego, channeled. And first it's about the inner critic, but then it goes into how some men are driven by success. And here's that point, because we spoke to this earlier. What makes a man so externally driven? So perhaps you are on the fast track of success. You're constantly driven to be great, better, best. You're a mover, a shaker, a big time achiever. You're a real self-made man or a dazzling diva. You're rich, you're famous, you make quite a splash. You're on top of the world and you're rolling in cash. You drive the right car, you've married the right spouse. Today, lunch with Oprah, tomorrow, the White House. But at night, insecurity pays you a call, because you know any time that you could lose it all. Your shrink says to rest. Your spouse sure agrees. Your doctor says ulcers, take 14 of these. You know you should slow it down sooner or later, but your foot is just glued to the accelerator. Your ego consoles. Well, at least you're successful. It's a sign of success to be constantly stressful. You've made it to prime time and everyone loves you. But your self-esteem's based on what others think of you. And opinions can change in the blink of an eye, which is why you need meds just to sleep and get by. Now, that didn't start at the beginning, and it certainly is not the end of that poem. It has a happy ending.
It is a
But
gorgeous cadence, and that is another thing, the lyrical quality. We're talking about things that wear down our defense mechanisms to meaningful change within. And Scott just demonstrated exactly what we're talking about, which is it is a lyrical and a flowing thing that also appeals to your emotional world within. So it's a brilliant tool. That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And again, I'm sure it's a much longer, but it has, I feel like it has the building blocks of exactly what we're talking about in it. Scott, like the thing is that whenever anybody comes on here, I don't do a question set in case that has not been made completely obvious. We just have a conversation about things. And Scott, I really want to turn this over to you. What do you want people to hear? This is your passionate work that you've been doing for a while. This is something that you're really called to, and you describe channeling, which is one of the things, concepts in spirituality, where you have access to an inner knowing that connects you to your higher self and to a collective and what they need to hear. Scott, what do you think people need to hear here? Here.
I tune in now to your audience, the collective consciousness of the people listening. We've talked a lot about how difficult, how courageous it can be to start the inner journey the first few years. We haven't talked too much about the rewards along the way. The rewards along the way are, well, first of all, if you haven't cried in a long time and you let that cloudburst happen, there is a relief. There is crystal clear vibrations going on. You can see the world in a new light. So it's like a renewal. So that is immediate once you start that. When you start working with your inner child, what you're doing is you're learning to be kind to yourself. That has immediate results. And honesty, I don't know how to be kind to myself. I only know how to be judgmental Well, even that kind of honesty is clarifying, and it makes you feel like you want to be a beginner. You can teach an old dog new tricks. You can. Like, it's great. You could just start out at 81, 71, 51, 39. Life begins where you are now. And if you start to get excited about being a full time learner, an everlasting beginner, my favorite teachers, the ones I learn from and look up to, are the ones that emulate being a beginner. Not this huge weight of carrying special wisdom, but just being a really good, humble student that enjoys learning, that will keep on learning for the rest of their life. I don't like gurus and masters and people who put that stuff out. I'm much more friendly and trusting when people put out their humanness and are acknowledging that they're constantly learning. The more bright your light gets, the more that light can shine on certain shadow aspects that you couldn't see before. And instead of going, oh, there's more work to do, when am I going to finish? You go, yay, celebration! The light has shined on yet another shadow that was controlling me in the underworld where I could not see it. And now that I can see it, I can heal it. So we begin to applaud each time we get to another layer of the onion of something that was brought to us by society instead of authentically who we are. Woo, there's another one. As Queen said, another one bites the dust. Another illusion bites the dust. Yay! Celebrate! And find people in your life who celebrate that with you, who celebrate awareness instead of unfairness. You can look out in the world and see all the things that are unfair, but if you dare, I would suggest just see it, everything is fair. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. And if it triggers anger and social outrage and whatever, you take steps to do what you can to heal it internally, but also maybe politically. Who knows? It's just a lot more fun than sitting in your house feeling like a victim.
And okay, so one thing I do want to like immediately address is the idea of part of healing is understanding where you've been victimized. It genuinely is. And so, but living in that energy of why did this happen to me is being in your victimhood. And you have to understand what happened to you that might have damaged you. Understanding that the people who damaged you or the circumstances that damaged you were also simply part and parcel of this world. That suffering, unfortunately, really is part of life. That life is not intrinsically fair, but we can approach each other in an equitable and a kind and a balanced fashion. So that equality and fairness really falls down to the individual. They say that the true test of character is not in how you treat those you do not like, or you do like, but rather in how you treat people that you do not naturally like. So that's the true test of character, the idea that you can still approach somebody with kindness and compassion, even if absolutely everything about them is in contrast to who you think you should be and who you think the world should be. So the test of compassion is it is not meted out by the idea of who deserves it, but understanding that we all deserve it. And that includes you. And that's part of healing. And I don't mean you in the, Scott, I mean you in the generalized universal sense. You deserve compassion. And that is one of the ways that you can learn to start being kind to yourself. You can start learning to reprogram your inner dialogue so that when you make a mistake, you don't beat up on yourself for being stupid or I did that thing again. You look for the ways in which you improved. You look for the things that you're working on. You look for the causation of it as well. When you talked about not liking gurus, boy, am I on board with that one because elevating the idea that we're, I'm going to laugh because it really does crack me up. The idea that we're supposed to detach from this experience in order to be able to survive it is, I think, kind of a misfire of a message. I've seen spiritual teachers who are like, I don't get angry, I don't get happy. It's like, well, we have eternity to be incorporeal. We really do. While we're here, we're going to have a variety of emotions. and understanding that each will pass, but each has something to teach us about our internal world and what we're looking to heal and what we might be trying to contribute to the greater world, allows us to flow with our internal world rather than trying to mute it. Detached thinking is one of the spiritual concepts, but it doesn't solve a lot because it just kind of observes everything. And I am somebody who will never be a particularly detached person. I have a lot of fire in me, and I'm not looking to put it out. I'm looking to direct it in a way, because fire also contains within it rebirth. Yes, there is the concept of destruction, but then there is also something new is born from that. We are not trying to fix our internal worlds. We are trying to understand them in order to harness our greatest strengths, our greatest gifts, which will help people find their purpose in this world. And people hear purpose and confuse it with profession all the time. I will say it over and over again. Purpose and profession are not necessarily the same thing. They can be. But your purpose in this world might be to heal generational trauma, to free your family from generational trauma, to break the chains of those energetic and emotional bonds. That's a valid and a completely one. It's a completely valid life purpose to have. Do not judge the idea of your purpose by what will other people think of it, but what does it do within your world and the world around you? And if you learn to be a happier and a healthier man, as a for instance, you'll have happier and healthier people in your greater relationships, because no one's acting from a place of defensiveness. We defend our wounds. We defend our wounds with anger, with rationalization, with denial, with shame. That, believe it or not, shame is also a defense mechanism. And if you want to
Mm-hmm.
know, like, the idea that anybody can be shamed into meaningful change, I direct you towards the Catholic Church, which has it does not work. In order to really heal yourself, you have to embrace yourself. And that is not saying everything I do is great, but rather I accept every part of me as a result of something else that may have influenced me or an integral part of who I am. Every good thing, that which makes you awesome, can also make you suck. The fiery thing that I'm talking about that has me going towards meaningful change and trying to help other people find it, if I don't understand what's going on within me, I turn into Mount Vesuvius and I take out the town around me, and it doesn't. Understanding of self without shame,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what it may contain.
Mm.
Building blocks of your healthy life are contained in the things that you will not look at and are ashamed. Stop being ashamed of them. And that is one of the things that Scott's work is trying to help people do. And
Mm.
humor, almost nothing makes us feel, it releases so many happy things in our lives. When you're happy, you're far more likely to be willing to do the work. I love that, the Dr. Seuss medley sort of cadence that you have with things. Scott, what else do you have to add to this? Is there anything else you feel like people should know?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I am so with you on this. I just like applauding every word that comes out of your mouth. I wish that we could slow you down and dissect every sentence and respond to it. But I'm just going to let it wash over me and touch my heart, which is what it did. Um, yeah, I'd like to give another example of how I use humor to foster self-awareness. So I do in the book tell this little story, and I pretend that I started a 12-step program and that I'm speaking at it. And what I say is that I discovered that the addiction behind all my other addictions that drove me to drink, that drove me for compulsive sex, that desperately makes me want validation from others, or just distract myself on the phone all day, that the addiction behind all my addictions is the addiction to shame, to perceiving myself and life through the lens of an inner critic, not a constructive critic, but a destructive critic who keeps repeating the story that I learned in childhood. Bad me, poor me. So I tell this story and I say, okay, thank you for coming to Critaholics Anonymous. I'm going to tell my story in such a way that I hope that fellow critaholics out there can gain inspiration, strength, and hope from hearing my tale. I wasn't always a critaholic. I used to be able to enjoy a few harmless judgments of myself, sometimes others, at parties and social gatherings. But as it started to become an addiction, I'd wake up in the morning and just take a double shot of straight self criticism, criticizing myself while all alone. Wasn't even a social experience anymore. And one day I was in my car and I was caught by a policeman thinking and driving. My thoughts had been 84 miles per minute, way over the speed limit in California. And I was arrested for inner child abuse, driving myself crazy. And it was a Sunday, and when I told him I was on my way to my office, he added resisting arrest. How many people feel guilty of resisting arrest? Ah, your body says, Bubala, you need to take a break, rest. And you're like, no, no, I got more to do, more to do. You are resisting arrest, senor. So I was asked to be my own prosecuting attorney because they knew I had so much experience in that role. And I went to court and I won my case. I was found guilty of giving myself a hard time. And the judge said, look, young man, if you don't learn to be more gentle with yourself, you're going to have to serve hard time for giving yourself such a hard time. And that's when I began to cultivate and value gentle thoughts, gentle expressions towards the self. I realized that discouraging self-talk was talking me out of my courage. There is no such thing as motivation by guilt and shame. And I began to develop encouraging self-talk. One day, one thought at a time, with great respect for the fact that I'm never going to get this perfect. It's all the developmental process that I have fallen in love with. And I have fallen out of love with my images of perfection. Being a perfectionist is like saying, I seek and look for and find imperfection everywhere. And then I go about trying to fix it, or maybe feel guilty about not fixing it, or feeling angry at somebody who's not fixing it. But perceiving imperfection is what perfectionists do. I have recovered most of my essential sense of self. So I'm hanging out mostly in that garden, Rumi, the field beyond all ideas of right doing and wrongdoing. There is a field, and I'll meet you there. It's across the street from the courtroom where we've been prosecuting and defending ourselves. There's a playground. That's where I am.
Particularly because, again, men and women bear different burdens in a gendered programmed society, a gendered society. And what men really have to ask themselves, because it is tough work and it does mean like kind of assaulting the idea of manhood within yourself to see what you, and that sounds very violent, but it is tearing down some walls. What you really have to ask yourself is, do you want to get by or do you want to get better? And getting better is the thing that will improve all areas of your life, including how you address yourself in your head, how you feel about your life, how you assess the worth of each day. Getting by is when you do the same thing over and over again, content with your level of misery. And there is almost no way for people to be truly happy if they have 6 emotions that are like, this is an arbitrary number, and our world tells you shut the door on 4 of those and just get by with these 2, which is what we do to men. And what Scott is talking about is finding a space within you where you open all of those doors. And instead of saying, I'm doing something wrong, I'm doing something wrong looking behind those doors that the entire world told me, you got to shut those or you're not a man. Open those up and you will be a full person. Quit defining your existence by the biological functions of your bodies, and understand that within you is an emotional response system that you have power over, but that it really starts with making friends with it rather than trying to shun it. And we have a societal structure that tells men to shun that world. The work that Scott Grace is doing is trying to help people travel into that land as a curious tourist so that they can learn about the attractions and the different things that they will face, and they can enjoy that journey as a form of play, as a form of delight, as a form of self-acceptance, eradicating the idea that they should be ashamed of the four doors that our entire world said close those. Turned out the entire world was lying to you. And your ability to have joy, to have connection, to have love, to have a spiritual faith within yourself as well. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the ability to feel connected and guided lies behind those four doors. So do you want to get by or do you want to get better? Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Scott Grace on Logical Magic, Examining Esoterica. Scott, thank you so much for joining me again. Where can people find your work?
www.scottsongs.com, SCOTTSONGS.com. If you look up Scott K. Grace on YouTube or Facebook, you will be face to face with a lot of grace.
And I will
And I
drop
look,
the links in the episode notes and the description box down below. Remember, episode notes are for the audio. Description box is I put the video versions of this up on my YouTube channel, Cronecast at the Rising Moon. So there will be links to be able to access Scott's work.
sure. And I will share this with my tribe as well. It's been a pleasure to meet you. I hope we get a chance to talk again.
It was lovely to meet you as well, guys. I'm Alane. You can find me at therisingmoon.com to book me for what? A tarot card reading where I really look into your subconscious things. I can do predictive tarot. I much prefer helping people understand the things that are holding them back, and tarot can do that. It's a good facilitation tool. You can also find me at Cronecast at the Rising Moon. I have a Patreon where I have weekly and monthly spiritual advice to help you heal your wounds so that you can go forward as a strong and confident warrior, regardless of your gender identification. Take care, be well, and live magically.